Okay, this is the third time making the video. I'm sure the third time's a charm. This is section 6.5 from your MathLinks textbook on how to divide a fraction by a fraction. Your three exemplar questions can be done different ways. We're going to learn three different methods. The first method is called the common denominator method. And in this method, for the first example, we have 4/5 divided by 3/10. So if I think about this picture, what I have is I have 4/5 of something, and we can think of it as a chocolate bar or a pizza or whatever you want. And I'll highlight 4/5. And I'll say, if I have 4/5 of something, and I want to divide it into groups of 3/10 large each, how many groups could I make? Well, in order to do that, I need to cut these into tenths. So I'm going to cut these fifths. What used to be 4/5, I'm now going to make 8/10. And I'm going to ask myself, if I have 8/10 of something and I need to divide it into groups of 3/10, how many groups can I make? Well, there's one group of 3/10. There's another group of 3/10. And in terms of how many, that third group, I can't make a full group of 3/10. But what I can do is I can make 2/3 of a group. 2/3 of that final group can be made. So I can make a full group, a second full group, and 2/3 of a third group of 3/10. So my answer based solely on the picture is how many groups of 3/10 can I make? The answer would be 2 and 2/3. And I guess really that's a third method, would be drawing it, but that's so labor intensive that it's not worth doing. But the way we can use the common denominator is, well, there's my original question, and there's my equivalent equation that has a common denominator. And just like multiplication, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the numerators, and I'm going to divide the denominators. And once you have that written, we're going to simply do the same thing we did with multiplication. We're going to divide the numerators. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it like this for a second. 10 divided by 10 is 1. And at this stage, because I didn't divide my numerators, I just wanted you to know that when you divide by 1, you don't affect the numerator's value. So really, that's going to be the same thing as simply this. And 8 divided by 3 can be expressed as an actual fraction. So my answer using the common denominator would be 8/3, which is an improper fraction. And when I reconstitute it back to mixed, I will get the same answer I did with the first drawing, which is 2 and 2/3. The second question, 2/9 divided by 5/6, or 2/9 divided by 5/6. We're going to look at this question. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I'm going to go back and look at the second method, method 2. I'm going to look at method 2, which is multiplying by the reciprocal. And what this means is, in that first question that I did 4/5 divided by 3/10, I know my answer was 2 and 2/3. I already did it working the common denominator picture. But if I take that question, and if I keep the first fraction, and I change my division to multiplication, so I'm going to use multiplication instead. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 3/10 and I'm going to flip it, or I'm going to swap the numerator with the denominator. So instead of being 3/10, it's going to be 10/3. If I multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal, 10/3 of the second, I will be able to get the same answer, but using a completely different method. So here I'm going to multiply my numerators to get 40, multiply my denominators to get 15. How many 15s in 40? There's 2, with 10 15ths left over. And in lowest terms, that would be the same answer I got. But instead of getting it using common denominator, I got it by multiplying the first fraction by the reciprocal, or the flip, of the second fraction. So if I think of that method with the second question, and the second question, it works really well because it's really difficult to think about 2/9 of something and asking yourself, if I have 2/9 of something, if I was to draw it here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines makes, oopsie daisy, there's 2/9. How many groups of 5/9 can I make from 2/9? And the answer is, if I think about this, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many groups of 2/9? If I have 2/9, then I have to make a group of 5/9, which is that little ditty line right here. How much of a group can I make? Well, I can make 2/5 of a group, right? Because that whole group is 5/9, and since I have 2/9, I can make 2/5 of the group of 5/9 if I have 2/9. I know that's wordy, but that's what the picture would look like. But instead of doing it this way, I could say, okay, what if I choose to keep the first fraction? Oh, I made a mistake. It's supposed to be sixths. Oh, ignore that whole last part. I made a mistake. And I say, instead of doing that, I want to multiply by the reciprocal of 6/5 or 5/6, which is going to be 6/5. Now, I know from the previous question I'm able to get the same answer. I know from the previous question I was able to get the right answer. So if I multiply the numerators here, I get 12. If I multiply the denominators, I get 45. Some people think that's lowest terms, but it's not because both are divisible by 3. And I end up getting 4/15 as my final answer. So the answer for B, using multiplication by the reciprocal, would be 4/15. But finally with C, given the fact you could use a common denominator, given the fact you can use the method of multiplying by the reciprocal, probably the best method for mixed fractions, if I have 3 1/6 divided by 1 2/3, when dealing with mixed fractions, whether it's adding, multiplying, dividing, or subtracting, the easiest way to deal with them is to think of them as improper. So if I start with this question instead of the original, instead of dealing with 3 1/6, I deal with 19/6. Instead of dealing with 1 2/3, I deal with 5/3. Then the second method of multiplying by the reciprocal, I keep the first fraction as is, and multiply by the flip or the reciprocal of the second, I get 3/5. Some people know, like Hermie knows, that if I'm going to multiply two fractions together, a smart person would cross-reduce first. So I'm going to cross-reduce here. You don't have to, but if you did, great. If you didn't, no problem. Once I do that, 19 times 1 is 19. 2 times 5 is 10. My final answer for the third show you know will be 1 9/10.